Welcome to John Carter Stories. My son stared at the medical bill clutched in my shaking hands, then glanced at his brand new boat gleaming in the water, and he actually laughed. The sound of it cut through me like a knife. "Dad," he said, popping open a bottle of champagne that probably cost more than my monthly medication, "you've got Medicare for a reason, don't you? I just dropped $130,000 on this beauty. I'm completely tapped out." My daughter-in-law didn't even bother looking up from her phone. "Just sell that old truck of yours, William. Maybe losing a leg will teach you some financial responsibility." My granddaughter pointed her phone camera right at my face and giggled. "You'll figure it out, Gramps." They thought I was helpless. They thought I was trapped. They thought I was just some broken-down old man with nowhere else to turn. But what they forgot, what they completely forgot, was that before I became a retiree with a failing body, I was a master machinist for 45 years, and I know exactly how to take apart a machine when it stops working the way it should, even if that machine is my own family. Before I tell you how I dismantled everything they built on my back and why my adopted son ended up being the only one with a shred of decency, please subscribe and like this video, and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is William Carter. I'm 77 years old, and for 45 years I worked with steel and iron, shaping metal with precision until my hands were permanently stained with grease and scars. I built things that lasted, things you could depend on. I thought I'd built a family that would last too, but as I limped into the backyard of the lakeside mansion that I had paid for, I realized I'd built nothing but a monument to greed. The smell hit me first, expensive steak sizzling on a grill that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The rich, smoky aroma turned my empty stomach. My right leg was throbbing with that deep, bone-crushing ache that started in my hip and shot all the way down to my cold, numb toes. The specialist had been crystal clear about it. Peripheral artery disease. The blood flow was completely blocked. Without vascular bypass surgery within the week, the tissue would start dying. Gangrene would set in fast. I'd lose the leg. I tightened my grip on my cane and dragged myself across the perfectly manicured lawn. Every step was agony, like hot wires being pulled through my veins. But you know what hurt worse than the physical pain? The fact that I was about to beg my own son for help. A father should never have to beg, especially not after giving his child everything. Marcus was standing by the dock in a crisp white linen shirt that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. He was laughing with a group of friends, pointing proudly at the sleek vessel bobbing in the water, a 24-foot speedboat shining under the afternoon sun like a trophy. I knew boats. I knew engines. That thing had serious horsepower and guzzled fuel like there was no tomorrow, and I knew it cost more than the house I grew up in. "Marcus," I called, my voice coming out raspy and weak. I cleared my throat and tried to stand straighter, tried to hide the pain that shot through me every time I put weight on my bad leg. "Son, can I talk to you for a minute?" Marcus turned around. For just a split second, maybe a fraction of a second, the smile on his face faltered. Then he pasted it right back on, that salesman smile, the one he used at his luxury car dealership. "Dad, you made it!" he shouted, throwing an arm around my shoulder. The smell of expensive cologne and champagne was overwhelming. "Everyone, this is my father, William Carter, the man, the myth himself. Grab some food, Dad. We're celebrating the new toy here." He gestured at the boat like it was his newborn child. "I need to talk to you, Marcus, privately." I kept my voice low. I didn't want to embarrass him in front of his wealthy friends. Marcus sighed, a dramatic, alcohol-tinged exhale. He guided me a few steps away, near the oversized outdoor fireplace that probably cost more than my first car. Rachel, my daughter-in-law, drifted over. Her face was holding a crystal glass of something bubbly, her face tight and shiny from whatever the cosmetic surgeon had done to it last week. "What is it, William?" Rachel asked, her tone making it clear I was interrupting something important. "We have guests." I reached into my worn jacket and pulled out the crumpled paper. I'd been clutching it so hard for the last 3 hours that it was permanently wrinkled. "I went to the specialist today," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "My leg, it's much worse. They need to operate on Tuesday. If they don't bypass the blocked artery, I lose everything below the knee." Marcus took a casual sip of his drink. "Well, that sounds serious, Dad. Good thing you've got that government insurance, right?" "It covers 80%, I explained, feeling smaller with every word. "But the co-pay and the specialized post-op care, I need $5,242 up front. The hospital needs a check Monday morning or they're canceling the surgery slot." I looked at Marcus. This was the boy I taught to ride a bike, the boy I stayed up with during fevers, the boy I gave everything to. Marcus actually laughed, a short, disbelieving bark of a laugh. $5,000? He looked around at the party, at the boat, at the catered spread. "Dad, look around you. I just dropped $130,000 on this boat, plus insurance, slip fees, fuel costs. I'm completely illiquid right now. Cash poor. You know how business is. Everything's tied up in assets." "You bought a boat," I said, my voice rising despite myself. "You bought a toy, and you're telling me you can't help me save my leg." "Lower your voice," Rachel hissed, stepping closer. Her eyes were cold. "You're making a scene." "I gave you this house." The words exploded out of me, anger finally breaking through the shame. 5 years ago, I signed over this property. My father built the original structure. I renovated every inch of it with my own 2 hands. It's worth $850,000, and I gave it to you for $1, one single dollar, because you promised that if I gave it to you to use as leverage for your business, you'd take care of me. You said I'd never have to worry again. And now I'm living in that guest shed out back with black mold growing in the shower, and you can't spare $5,000? Marcus rolled his eyes. He actually rolled his eyes at me. He looked at Rachel like I was the crazy one. "Dad, stop living in the past," Marcus dismissively said. "That transaction was 5 years ago. This is now. And right now, asking for $5,000 when I just made a major purchase, that's selfish. You're raining on my parade." "Selfish?" I whispered. Rachel swirled her drink, the ice clinking against the crystal. "Look, William, you have assets. Sell that ugly truck of yours. It's an eyesore in the driveway anymore. The neighbors have actually complained." "That truck is a 1978 F-150, I said, my voice shaking. "It's the only thing I have left. It's how I get to my doctor appointments." "Then take an Uber," Rachel said dismissively, "or walk. Although I guess the walking part is going to be pretty difficult if you don't get that surgery, huh?" She smiled, actually smiled. "Maybe losing a leg will teach you some financial responsibility. You should have saved more for retirement instead of always relying on us." The cruelty of her words hit me harder than any physical pain ever could. Responsibility. I'd worked 6 days a week for 40 years. I'd paid for Marcus's entire college education. I'd paid for their extravagant wedding. I signed over my life's greatest asset to ensure their success. And this is what I got in return. I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to defend me, waiting for him to tell her wife she couldn't speak to his father that way. Marcus just shrugged. "She's got a point, Dad. We're strapped for cash. Maybe you could set up a GoFundMe or something. Ask people at the church." My heart turned to lead in my chest. I looked at that boat again, the gleaming, expensive toy bobbing in the water. That boat was worth 20 of my surgeries. "I'm leaving," I said quietly. I didn't want them to see me cry. I turned around, but my bad leg, it just gave out. It simply buckled under the weight and the stress and the pain. I stumbled forward, reaching desperately for the patio railing, but I missed. I hit the slate pavers hard. Pain exploded through my knee and hip like fireworks. My cane clattered away across the expensive stone with a hollow sound that echoed in my ears. I lay there for a moment, completely stunned, staring up at the perfect blue sky. I waited for hands to help me up. I waited for my son to rush over with concern. Instead, I heard giggling. I turned my head slowly. My 19-year-old granddaughter, Emma, was standing over me with her iPhone held steady, the camera lens pointed directly at my face. "Oh my God, you guys," she said, not to me, but to her phone screen, to whatever live stream she was broadcasting. "My grandpa just totally wiped out. He's so dramatic. Hashtag old people problems. Hashtag family drama." She was live streaming my pain, broadcasting my humiliation to her 50,000 followers. "Emma, help me up," I said through gritted teeth. She laughed again, that same careless giggle. "Wait, can you do it again? I missed the beginning." She paused. "Just kidding. You're fine, Grandpa. You'll figure it out. Just crawl to that chair over there." Marcus called out from the grill, not even bothering to come over. "Emma, make sure you get the boat in the background of the shot. Good lighting there." That was the moment. That was the exact moment something inside me snapped. It wasn't a bone breaking. It was the last thread of love I held for these people. I looked at my son flipping burgers while his father lay bleeding on the ground. I looked at my daughter-in-law checking her reflection in the patio door glass. I looked at my granddaughter using my suffering for internet fame. I didn't ask for help again. I gritted my teeth so hard I thought they might crack. Fighting back a scream of pure agony, I rolled onto my side, every muscle trembling, sweat pouring down my face. I pushed myself up onto my hands and knees. I grabbed my cane from where it had fallen, and I stood up. I was dirty. My knee was bleeding through my pants, but I stood up. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't say another word. I turned my back on the champagne, the boat, the laughter, and the monsters I had somehow created. I began the long, agonizing walk back to the guest house, every step a reminder of my mistake in trusting them. But as I limped away, something cold and hard settled deep in my gut, a resolve. They thought the house was theirs. They thought the land his showroom sat on was theirs. They thought I was just a senile old man with no options left. They were wrong. I still had one card left to play, and I had one son who hadn't spoken to me in years because of Marcus's lies. I reached into my pocket with shaking fingers and pulled out the old flip phone that Marcus thought was worthless. I dialed a number I'd written on a scrap of paper years ago and kept hidden away. I prayed he would answer. I prayed he would forgive me, because he was the only hope I had left. What happened next changed everything. The call I made that day set off a chain of events that would bring my entire family to their knees. But first, I had to survive the night. Stay with me. The walk back to the guest cottage felt like marching through hell itself. Every single step sent lightning bolts of fire shooting up from my ankle to my hip, a constant reminder that my body was giving up on me just as fast as my family had. The building Marcus called a guest cottage was really just a converted garage sitting about 100 yards from the main house. The siding was peeling off in chunks, and you could feel the cold air coming right through the walls where the insulation had rotted away. I opened the door and the smell hit me immediately. Damp drywall, old motor oil, and the distinct sour smell of loneliness and neglect. I collapsed onto the sunken mattress without even taking off my shoes. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, not from the cold, but from the adrenaline still pumping through my system from the humiliation I'd just endured. I could still hear the faint thumping of bass from the party up at the main house, a rhythmic reminder of their wealth and complete indifference to my suffering. I stared at the ceiling, counting water stains, trying to figure out how I was going to call the surgeon Monday morning and tell them the procedure was off. I would lose the leg. That was my reality now. I closed my eyes and tried to accept it, but the anger burned hotter than the pain in my arteries. Then I heard a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat.
the rattle and cough of a failing engine, followed by the squeal of worn brake pads that desperately needed replacing. I pulled myself up and looked out the small, grimy window. A battered white 2006 Chevy van was pulling into the gravel patch next to my shed. The passenger door was dented from some parking lot accident, and the ladder rack on top was covered in rust. It was the ugliest vehicle in the entire county, and right now, it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Daniel. He didn't knock. He never knocked. The door creaked open, and suddenly my small room felt even smaller, filled with the presence of a man who worked with his hands for a living. Daniel was 38, but looked older today. His face was smeared with grease, and his blue work uniform had a patch on the shoulder that was peeling off at the edges. He smelled like brake fluid and exhaust, the smell of honest work. In his hand was a plastic grocery bag that looked heavy. "Hey, Pops," he said, his voice rough and tired. He didn't smile. Daniel rarely smiled these days. Life had been hard on him, and I knew too much of that was my fault for not protecting him from Marcus's bullying when they were kids. I tried to sit up straighter, wiping the sweat from my forehead. "Hey, son, you're working late on a Sunday." "Double time," he grunted, setting the bag down on my wobbly table. "Quick job replacing a transmission on a delivery truck. I brought you some things." He started unpacking. Not champagne or expensive steaks, just a bag of oranges, a loaf of whole wheat bread, and a large bottle of generic ibuprofen. "I know the prescription meds are expensive," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I thought these might help with the inflammation, and you need vitamin C. I read online it helps with circulation." "Thank you, Daniel," I said, and my voice cracked like breaking glass. I looked at those oranges, bright and vibrant against the gray gloom of my room. Such a small thing, but it was everything he had to give. Daniel turned to really look at me then, and his eyes went wide with shock. He took 2 quick steps across the room and knelt by the bed. His hand reached out and touched my right leg, and even through the fabric of my pants he could feel the heat radiating from the swelling and infection. "Jesus," Daniel hissed, standing up abruptly. He ran both his hands through his messy, dark hair. "You need that surgery, Pops. You needed it yesterday. Did you tell Marcus? Did you show him this?" I looked down at my hands, unable to meet his eyes. I showed him the bill. "And?" Daniel demanded, his voice rising. The veins in his neck were bulging. He said, "He just bought a boat." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Daniel kicked the metal trash can next to the table. It flew across the room and crashed into the wall with a bang, spilling empty coffee cups and crumpled tissues everywhere. "A boat?" Daniel roared, his voice shaking with rage. "He bought a goddamn boat while his father is rotting in a shed." He started marching toward the door, his fists clenched. "I'm going over there right now. I'm going to drag him out of that mansion by his hair and make him look at this leg. I'm going to tear that whole party apart." "Daniel, no!" I shouted, pushing myself off the bed with all my strength. I stumbled and grabbed his arm. He was solid muscle from years of heavy mechanical work, but he stopped when he felt my grip. "Don't," I pleaded desperately. "They have guests, security cameras. Rachel will call the police in a heartbeat. She's been waiting for a reason to get a restraining order against you. She'll say you're violent, that you're trespassing. Don't give them that satisfaction." Daniel looked at me, and I saw tears welling up in his eyes, tears of pure rage and helplessness. "But Pops, they're killing you. They're literally just letting you die." "I know," I said, leaning against him for support. "I know, son, but screaming at them won't make money appear. It'll only get you thrown in jail, and then who's going to bring me oranges?" Daniel let out a shuddering breath. He looked completely defeated. He walked over to the tiny kitchenette and opened the mini fridge. It was practically empty, just half a carton of milk and a jar of pickles. He slammed the fridge door shut, and the whole unit shook. "This isn't right," he muttered under his breath. "This isn't how it ends." He turned back to face me. "I don't have the money, Pops. You know I don't. Business has been slow, and my shop rent just went up again. I've got maybe $400 in the bank. That's it." It's okay, I lied, my heart breaking. I'll figure something out. I'll sell the truck. You love that truck, Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. You restored that F-150 with Mom before she died. It's the last piece of her you have left. It's just metal, I said, though saying the words felt like tearing out my own heart. Daniel stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something strange cross his face, a look of calculation, of desperate determination. He checked his watch, a cheap digital one with a cracked face. I have to go, he said abruptly. You just got here, I said, confused. I forgot. I have another job, an emergency call. Someone broke down on the interstate. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the door, his jaw set in that way that meant he'd made his mind about something. I'll be back, Pops. Just take those pills. Eat an orange. Don't do anything drastic until I get back. He left as quickly as he had arrived. I heard the van door slam and the engine sputter to life. I listened until the sound of his exhaust faded into the distance. That night was the longest of my entire life. The ibuprofen took the edge off, but it couldn't touch the deep, bone-grinding ache of dying tissue. I lay in the dark, listening to the party finally wind down up at the main house. I heard laughter as guests left. I heard a splash of someone taking a late-night swim in their heated pool. I imagined Marcus and Rachel sitting by their fire pit, completely unbothered by the fact that just 20 yards away, their father was lying in the dark, terrified of the future. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the dirty window, hitting me right in the eyes. I groaned, trying to shift my leg. It was stiff, almost paralyzed. Then I heard it again, the rumble of the Chevy van. I checked the clock. 7 a.m. Daniel was back. I sat up, groggy and disoriented. The door opened, and Daniel walked in. He looked terrible, absolutely terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, with dark circles underneath that looked like bruises. His work uniform was even dirtier than yesterday, stained with fresh black grease and oil. And he wasn't wearing his work boots. He had on an old pair of beat-up sneakers.
He walked straight to the table and pulled a thick brown envelope from inside his jacket. He dropped it on the table with a heavy, solid thud. "What's this?" I asked, rubbing my eyes. Daniel pulled out a chair and collapsed into it like all his strings had been cut at once. "Open it." I reached for the envelope with trembling hands. It felt warm. I undid the metal clasp and looked inside. My breath caught in my throat. Cash. Stacks of cash. Hundreds, 50s, 20s. The bills weren't crisp and clean like the money Marcus flashed around. These bills were wrinkled, creased. Some had grease smudges on the corners. They smelled like sweat and oil. I poured it out onto the table, a chaotic pile of salvation. "Count it," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. My hands were shaking so badly I kept dropping bills. 1,000, 2,000, 4,000, $5,300. 5,300? I whispered in disbelief. I looked up at him. "Daniel, where did you get this? You said you only had 400. Daniel cleared his throat and looked away, staring at a water stain on the wall like it was the most fascinating thing in the world. "I told you. Emergency call. Turned into a big job. Fleet manager needed 5 trucks overhauled overnight. Rush job, cash payment. I worked all night." I looked at the money, then back at him. 5 trucks in 12 hours? That was physically impossible, even for a mechanic as skilled as Daniel. And no fleet manager pays $5,000 in cash on a Sunday night for work that wasn't scheduled. I looked at his hands. They were raw, the knuckles scraped and bleeding. I looked at his feet. "Where are your red-winged boots?" I asked slowly. "You never work without your steel toes. Ever." "Left them at the shop," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Daniel," I said, feeling my stomach drop, "this money, did you do something illegal? Did you borrow from a loan shark?" "No, Pops," he said, finally looking me in the eye. I swear it's honest money. It's mine, and now it's yours." He reached across the table and put his rough, trembling hand over mine. "Call the hospital. Tell them you're coming in." I wanted to ask more questions. I wanted to demand answers about why he was avoiding my gaze, why he looked like he'd lost a piece of his soul in the last 12 hours. But I looked at the money, and I looked at my purple, swollen leg. I had no choice. "Okay," I said, clutching those dirty bills to my chest. "Okay, son, I'll call them." Daniel stood up, wincing like his own body was in pain. "Good. I need to go home and sleep. I'm completely beat." He turned to leave, and for just a second I saw him pause at the door. His hand lingered on the frame. He looked back at me, and there was such sadness in his eyes. "Love you, Pops," he said softly. "Love you too, son." He walked out to his van, and I watched him drive away. As the sound of his engine faded, I realized something that made my heart ache. While Marcus had given me a lecture on responsibility and blamed me for not saving enough, Daniel had just given me a masterclass in sacrifice. I picked up the phone to call the hospital, pressing those greasy bills against my heart. I didn't know yet what he had done. I didn't know that the fleet job was a complete lie. I didn't know that his van was empty, not because he'd unloaded tools, but because he'd sold everything he owned to fill that envelope. I dialed the number, and as the receptionist answered, I felt a tear roll down my cheek. It was the first time in 5 years I felt real hope. But deep down, my gut was twisting with dread. A father knows when his son is hiding pain, and I knew with absolute certainty that this $5,000 cost Daniel far more than just a sleepless night. I was about to find out the truth, and it would break my heart, but it would also light a fire inside me that would burn down everything Marcus had built.
The hospital waiting room smelled like disinfectant and fear. But sitting there, in my thin gown, it wasn't the smell making me nauseous. It was the knot of guilt twisting in my stomach. I was in the pre-op holding area, and the nurse had already counted out Daniel's greasy bills with a look of mild disgust on her face. But she'd stamped my file, paid in full. My leg was going to be saved. The bypass surgery was scheduled within the hour. But lying there, staring at those fluorescent lights humming above me, I couldn't get the image of Daniel's hands out of my mind, his raw knuckles, his haunted eyes. That story about the fleet job just didn't add up. I'd been in the trade for 40 years. I knew that nobody paid cash on a Sunday night for emergency work that hadn't been scheduled weeks in advance. I needed to know the truth before they put me under. If something went wrong on that operating table, if I died, I needed to know what my son had sacrificed. I reached for my phone on the bedside tray with clumsy fingers. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Sully, an old friend who ran the biggest machine shop in South Seattle. If anyone knew about a massive fleet repair job happening overnight, it would be him. The phone rang 4 times before his booming voice came through. "William, you old dog, I thought you were retired." I kept my voice low so the nurses wouldn't hear. "Hey, Sully, sorry to bother you. I just wanted to ask about Daniel. He told me he pulled an all-nighter fixing a fleet of delivery trucks. I was wondering if you threw that work his way." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end, the kind of silence that carries terrible news. Sully sighed deeply. "William, Daniel made me promise not to say anything to you." My heart started pounding against my ribs. "Say anything about what, Sully? Did he steal the money?" No, he didn't steal it." Another pause. "It's worse than that, William. He came to my shop yesterday evening. He was desperate, shaking. He told me he needed $5,000 cash immediately, and he didn't care what he had to do to get it." I gripped the phone tighter. "And what did he do?" "He sold me his box, William. He sold me everything."
The air left my lungs completely. When a mechanic says he sold his box, he doesn't mean a cardboard container. He means his tool chest, his livelihood. And for a master mechanic like Daniel, that meant his Master Series roll cab, a triple bank chest in midnight blue that he'd spent 10 years paying off, filled with $50,000 worth of precision tools, diagnostic computers, impact wrenches, micrometers, torque wrenches. "He sold you the Master Series?" I whispered, barely able to form the words. "He sold it all," Sully said, and I could hear genuine regret in his voice. The chest, every single tool, the brand new air compressor he just bought last month. He even threw in his diagnostic scanner, William. That scanner alone is worth $6,000. He begged me to take it all for $5,300. I told him he was crazy, that it was worth 5 times that amount. But he said he needed the money in his hand right that second, or his father was going to lose a leg. I closed my eyes, and hot tears squeezed out, running down the sides of my face into my ears. "I tried to talk him out of it," Sully continued, his voice thick. "A mechanic without his tools is like a surgeon without hands. I told him he was ending his career. He just looked at me and said that tools can be replaced, but his dad can't." I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I couldn't speak. The sob that ripped through my chest was so violent that the heart monitor started beeping faster and faster. Daniel hadn't just given me money. He'd sacrificed his future, his livelihood, his identity. Those tools were everything he owned of value. And now he was a mechanic with nothing but his bare hands. "Mr. Carter, are you okay?" The nurse rushed over, alarmed. "Your heart rate is spiking." "I'm fine," I choked out, wiping my face with the rough hospital sheet. "I just received some news." I went into that surgery with the image of Daniel's empty van burned into my mind. As the anesthesia pulled me under and the world faded to black, I made a vow. If I woke up from this, I would spend every remaining breath making sure Daniel got those tools back, and I would make Marcus pay for every single cent. I woke up 3 hours later. My mouth tasted like cotton, and my leg felt heavy, wrapped in thick bandages. But that deep, throbbing ache of dying tissue was gone. The blood was flowing again. I was alive. I was whole. I blinked against the harsh lights and saw 2 blurry figures standing at the foot of my bed. For one brief, hopeful moment, my heart leapt thinking it was Daniel, but as my vision cleared, that hope curdled into pure disgust. It was Marcus and Rachel. They weren't holding flowers, no card, no concern in their eyes. Marcus was wearing a tennis outfit, a white polo and shorts like he'd just come from the country club. Rachel was wearing oversized sunglasses indoors and tapping away on her phone. "You're awake," Marcus said flatly. Not a question, not relief, just a statement of fact. "I'm awake," I croaked. "The surgery was successful." "That's great, Dad," Marcus said, checking his expensive Rolex. "Look, we can't stay long. We've got a situation." "A situation?" I asked weakly. "My leg was just sliced open, and you have a situation?" "This surgery of yours really messed up our schedule," Rachel said, finally looking up from her screen. "We were supposed to fly to Aspen this morning. We had a chalet booked at the Little Nell. Do you have any idea how hard it is to get reservations there during peak season?" I stared at them, my mind sharpening instantly despite the drugs still in my system. "You're upset about a ski trip." "It's not just a ski trip, Dad," Marcus said, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "It was a networking event. I was going to meet potential investors for the dealership expansion. Because you decided to have this emergency procedure right now, we had to cancel our first-class tickets. The airline only gave us partial credit. We're out $4,000 because of this." "You're out $4,000, I repeated slowly. Daniel just sold his entire life's work for $5,000 to save my leg, and you're standing here complaining about airline credits? What are you mumbling about? Rachel asked, wrinkling her nose in disgust. Nothing, I said quickly. I didn't want to mention Daniel. They didn't deserve to speak his name. Anyway, Marcus said, shifting his weight impatiently, we just came by to make sure you weren't dead and to tell you that since we're stuck in town, we're going to need you to sign some papers later this week. Papers? I asked carefully. The property, Marcus said casually, like he was discussing the weather. Since your health is obviously failing, we need to secure the assets, the dealership land especially. We need to extend the lease, or better yet, just transfer the title to me so we don't have to deal with probate if you, well, you know, if you kick the bucket. Rachel nodded enthusiastically. It's just responsible estate planning, William. We don't want the state taking everything or for random people to make claims on what's rightfully ours. Random people. She meant Daniel. They were terrified I might leave something to the son who actually loved me. Get out, I said. It came out as barely a whisper, but it carried every ounce of hate I'd been suppressing. Excuse me, Rachel said, lowering her sunglasses.
I said, get out, I roared, my voice breaking. Get out of my room. Go to Aspen. Go to hell. I don't care where you go, but get away from me. Marcus looked genuinely shocked. He took a step back. Dad, you're being irrational. It's the medication talking. We're just trying to help you manage your affairs responsibly. I pressed the call button for the nurse repeatedly. Nurse, remove these people. They're upsetting me. My blood pressure is rising. A nurse rushed in, looking alarmed at the scene unfolding. Sir, you need to calm down. Get them out. I pointed a trembling finger at my son. Fine. Be a grumpy old man. See if we visit you again. Come on, Rachel. This hospital smells like poor people anyway. They turned and walked out without a single backward glance. I watched my son walk away from his father's hospital bed, more worried about his lost vacation than his father's survival. As the door swung shut, a cold calm settled over me. It was the same calm I used to feel before making a difficult precision cut on expensive steel. No room for error, no room for emotion. Daniel had sold his tools. Marcus wanted my land. Fine. I reached for my phone again. I wasn't calling Daniel this time. I was calling my lawyer, Abernathy. I was going to need a power of attorney drawn up. I was going to need a forensic accountant, and I was going to need a plan to destroy the ungrateful monsters I'd raised while building a future for the son I'd chosen. The surgery had fixed my blood flow. My brain was getting plenty of oxygen now, and every neuron was firing with a single purpose: revenge. They had no idea what was coming. The old machinist was about to show them exactly what happens when you push a good man too far. This is where everything changed.
The ride back from the hospital was silent and cold. I took a cab because I refused to call Marcus, and besides, he was probably already halfway to Colorado, sipping expensive wine at 30,000 feet while his father navigated stairs on a freshly repaired leg. The pain was manageable now, just a dull throb instead of that screaming agony. But the ache in my chest, that was getting worse with every passing mile. I looked out the window at the long driveway leading up to the main house. The estate looked magnificent in the afternoon light. Manicured hedges, imposing brick facade, a fountain in the center of the circular driveway. It looked like success, like the American dream. But I was about to discover it was nothing more than a Hollywood set, painted cardboard hiding rot. The mail carrier was just pulling away as I got out of the taxi. Gary, a man I'd known for 20 years. He stopped his truck when he saw me and waved me over, looking frustrated. "Mr. Carter," he called out, leaning out the window, "you've got to tell your son to empty his mailbox. I can't fit another catalog in there. I'm legally required to deliver mail, but if the box is full, I have to mark it undeliverable." I apologized for my son, again. It felt like a habit I'd formed over 4 decades. "Just give it to me, Gary. I'll sort it out." He handed me a stack of envelopes thick enough to choke a horse. Glossy junk mail, catalogs for luxury watches, yachting magazines, offers for platinum credit cards. The mail of a man who loved to spend. I tucked it under my arm and started limping toward the guest cottage. I was just going to leave the pile on Marcus's porch when they got back. But then the wind picked up. A strong gust blew across the lake and scattered the top layer of mail onto the grass. I cursed under my breath, bending down painfully to pick them up. That's when I saw it. Red letters, bold and unmistakable. Wells Fargo Home Mortgage. Urgent second notice of default. I froze. My hand hovered over the envelope like it might bite me. It was addressed to Marcus Carter, but the address was this property, my property, or at least the property that used to be mine. I knew I shouldn't open it, federal offense to tamper with mail, but I also knew that Marcus had power of attorney over the house title, which meant my name was likely still attached somewhere in the history of the deed. If the ship was sinking, I was on it. I ripped the envelope open right there on the lawn, my hands trembling. I pulled out the single sheet of paper, and the numbers hit me like a physical punch to the gut. Notice of default. Amount past due, $184,400. Total principal balance, $612,000. I stared at that number until my vision blurred. $612,000. When I'd signed the house over to Marcus 5 years ago, there was no mortgage. I'd paid it off completely in 1998. I'd worked double shifts, holidays, weekends to make sure that house was free and clear. An asset worth nearly $1 million, fully owned. And now there was a $600,000 lien on it. I leaned against the oak tree my late wife had planted 30 years ago, struggling to breathe. A second mortgage. He'd taken out a massive loan against the house, and he wasn't even paying it. He was 3 months behind. The math started spinning in my head. He'd just bought a boat for $130,000. He drove a Porsche that cost more than most people's homes. Rachel drove a Mercedes G-Wagon. They went to Aspen. They threw parties with catered food that cost thousands. And yet they couldn't pay the mortgage on the house they got for free. They weren't just cash poor. They were drowning. They were living a Ponzi scheme life, using debt to pay for debt, trying to look like millionaires while the foundation rotted beneath their feet. And the worst part? The collateral was my home, the home where I raised both my sons, the home where my wife took her last breath. If the bank foreclosed, they wouldn't just take the big house, they'd take the land, the guest cottage, everything. I'd be homeless at 77 years old. I shoved the letter into my jacket pocket and looked up at that big house. It didn't look majestic anymore. It looked like a trap. I went into my cottage and sat on the edge of the bed. I needed to think clearly, rationally. If they were defaulting on the house, what else were they lying about? I waited until nightfall. The estate was pitch black without them there to turn on the expensive landscape lighting. I grabbed a small flashlight and a pair of latex gloves I used for cleaning. I felt like a criminal in my own home, but desperation changes a man's moral compass.
I made my way to the side of the garage where the trash and recycling bins were kept. The smell was awful, rotting food mixed with stale alcohol.
I opened the recycling bin first, filled with empty bottles. Dom Perignon, Grey Goose, expensive scotch, thousands of dollars in empty glass. They were literally drinking their mortgage payments. I opened the trash bin next and started digging through bags of kitchen waste until I found what I was looking for: office trash. Marcus usually shredded his documents, but sometimes he got lazy, or maybe he just didn't think his old father would ever be smart enough to look. I found a crumpled ball of paper near the bottom. I smoothed it out on the lid of the bin, shining my flashlight on it. A letter from a private equity firm downtown. Dear Mr. Carter, regarding your application for capital infusion for Carter Luxury Motors, after reviewing your financials, we must decline. The debt-to-equity ratio is alarming, and inventory turnover does not justify your presented valuation. Rejected. His dealership was failing. I dug deeper. A notice from the country club. Membership suspended due to non-payment. A credit card statement for Rachel. Balance $42,000. Minimum payment $1,200. Amount paid $0. Then I found something that made my blood run ice cold. A handwritten note on a legal pad, torn in half. I pieced it together carefully. Marcus's handwriting. Notes. Sell 5 acres to Amazon Logistics. Zoning change required. Dad needs to sign. If incompetent, court can appoint guardian. Timeline, ASAP. I dropped the paper like it was on fire. The 5 acres. He meant the land under his dealership, the land I still owned. He was planning to sell my land to cover his debts, but he couldn't sell it because it was in my name, so the plan was to make me incompetent. If incompetent, court can appoint guardian. That's why they'd been talking about my mental health, making jokes about me being senile, treating me like a child in front of guests. They were building a narrative. They wanted to strip me of my legal rights so they could liquidate the last thing I owned to save themselves. I stood there in the dark, surrounded by the stench of their garbage and their betrayal. These weren't just trash. This was ammunition. They weren't just bad with money. They were predators. And once they had the land, they'd discard me completely. I'd be lucky to end up in a state-run facility. I carefully gathered every piece of incriminating paper and put them in a plastic bag. I walked back to my cottage, my leg hurting, but my mind racing. I needed to secure my position. I needed to make sure that when they came for me, and they were coming soon, I wasn't the helpless old man they expected. I sat at my small table and stared at that handwritten note about guardianship. "You want incompetent, Marcus?" I whispered to the empty room. "I'll give you incompetent. I'll give you the most confused, senile old man you've ever seen. I'll make you think you've won. I'll let you bring me into your house so you can watch me." I picked up the phone and dialed Abernathy's private cell. It was late, but I knew he'd answer. "Abernathy," I said when he picked up, "don't ask me how I know, but they're underwater, deep. They have a second mortgage in default, and they're planning to challenge my competency to get the land." He heard sheets rustling. "William, are you certain?" "I have the bank notice in my hand and a note in Marcus's handwriting outlining the entire plan." "Okay," Abernathy said, his voice shifting from sleepy to razor sharp. "This changes everything. If they're desperate, they'll move fast. We need to move faster." I told him about the plan forming in my head. I was going to play dead, play the victim. "It's dangerous, William," Abernathy warned. "If they get a doctor to sign off on a diagnosis, it'll be very hard to reverse." I won't let it get that far, I said firmly. I just need access. I need to get inside the main house, into Marcus's office, get the digital files. The trash gave me smoke. I need the fire. I hung up and looked at the bag of evidence. Tomorrow, I would start leaving the stove on, forgetting names. I would give the performance of a lifetime. My son wanted to declare me incompetent to steal my land? Fine. I'll use that incompetence to get close enough to destroy him, legally speaking. I turned off the light and lay in the dark, clutching that Wells Fargo letter like a weapon. They were feasting on my carcass while I was still alive. But this old machinist wasn't dead yet, and I was about to throw a wrench into their machine that would shatter everything. The performance was about to begin, and they had no idea their father was the best actor they'd ever seen. What happened next will shock you.
The morning I turned 78 arrived with a sky so clear and blue it felt like mockery. From my window in the main house, yes, they'd moved me in 3 days earlier, claiming they wanted to monitor my declining health, I watched catering trucks arrive at dawn, crates of champagne, towers of seafood, tables covered in white linen that cost more than Daniel made in a month. It looked like a celebration fit for royalty, but I knew exactly what it was, a stage, and I was the prop in their final act. They dressed me in a suit that hung loose on my frame. I'd lost weight from the sheer stress of hating them every waking moment. Marcus tied my tie, his hands reeking of nervous sweat and cologne. "You look sharp, Dad," he said, not meeting my eyes in the mirror. "Big day. Lots of people coming to celebrate you. Just smile and nod, okay? Don't try to tell stories. We don't want you getting confused in front of guests." I looked at him with my practiced vacant stare, letting my mouth hang open slightly. "Is there cake?" I asked, my voice tremulous and weak. "Yes, Dad, cake, but only if you're good." He led me downstairs like a prisoner on death row. The house was packed with strangers, men in Italian suits eyeing the architecture like they were appraising it for auction, women in cocktail dresses who glanced at me with pity before returning to their gossip. I recognized faces from the files I'd been building, the banker from Wells Fargo looking anxious, Vincent, the man Marcus was washing car titles for, looking predatory. And in the corner, clutching a briefcase to his chest, was a man I instantly knew was the notary, sweating profusely, wiping his forehead every few seconds. They sat me in a large velvet chair in the center of the room, king and jester all at once. People shook my hand without really seeing me. They saw the land, the assets, the expiration date stamped on my forehead. "Happy birthday, Mr. Carter." I stared at their ties and mumbled about the weather. I saw Rachel watching from across the room, her eyes sharp as knives. She gave me a subtle nod that said, "Keep it up, old man." The party dragged on for hours. Champagne flowed, laughter grew hollow. I sat clutching a glass of water, watching the clock. I knew the timeline. The lease expired at midnight tonight. They needed my signature before sundown. Finally, the music stopped. Marcus tapped a spoon against his glass, and the room fell silent. He stepped into the center, microphone in hand, wearing his best salesman smile. "Thank you, everyone, for coming," he said, his voice echoing. "Today is special, not just because my father, William Carter, is turning 78, but because today marks a new chapter for the Carter legacy." He gestured at me dramatically. "My father built this life from nothing. He worked hard, sacrificed everything, and now, in his golden years, he's decided to do one final act of generosity. He's passing the torch, gifting the land and this beautiful home to me and Rachel so we can protect his legacy and care for him in the comfort he deserves." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Marcus waved the notary over. The sweating man scurried forward, setting up a small table in front of me. He laid out thick stacks of documents, heavy cream-colored paper, official-looking, final. Marcus knelt beside me, putting his hand on my knee. "Dad, this is the gift deed. This is you securing the future. All you have to do is sign right here, and everything will be taken care of." He held out a gold fountain pen, Mont Blanc, heavy and expensive. I looked at the pen, at the paper. I could read the bold letters even without my glasses. Durable power of attorney, quit claim deed, lease transfer. It wasn't just a transfer, it was surrender. If I signed this, I would own nothing. I'd be a guest in my own life until the day I died. I hesitated, let my hand shake violently, looked around the room like I was searching for escape. Rachel stepped forward and placed her hand on my shoulder. Her nails dug into my flesh through the suit jacket. She leaned down, and to the room it looked like loving encouragement, but her whisper was hot venom in my ear. "Sign it, old man. Sign it right now, or so help me God, you'll be sleeping in the gutter tonight. I'll throw your clothes on the lawn. I'll tell doctors you attacked me. You want the psych ward? Want to be strapped to a bed?" I widened my eyes in manufactured fear. "Cake, you said," I whispered. "Sign the paper and you get cake," she promised, her smile terrifying. "Don't sign and you starve." I looked at Emma, standing right in front of me with her phone up, ring light reflecting in her eyes, live streaming this, broadcasting the coercion of her grandfather to the world. "Say hi to the stream, Grandpa. Everyone's watching." Good. I wanted everyone to see. I reached out with a trembling hand and took the pen. Marcus looked nervous. He put his hand over mine, trying to steady it. "Just right here, Dad. Just an H and C. That's all." I looked at the signature line where I was supposed to sign away my life. I thought of Daniel, kneeling in the rain, his empty van, his tools in a pawn shop. I let the pen tip touch paper. The room held its breath. I started to write, made a jagged line, then another. "Is he doing it?" someone whispered. "He's trying," Rachel said loudly. "Just overwhelmed. Keep going, Dad." I stopped, lifted the pen. The signature was illegible, a madman's scrawl. "Need to do it again," Marcus said quickly, flipping to fresh paper. "That one didn't take. Try again. Focus." He was sweating so much, a drop fell on the document. I looked up at him. I saw panic in his eyes. He knew if I didn't sign in the next 10 minutes, the notary would leave, the investors would leave, and at midnight he'd be squatting on my land. I gripped the pen harder. Just for 1 microsecond, I let the mask slip. I let my eyes clear completely. I looked at Marcus directly and poured 40 years of disappointment into that look. He flinched. He saw it. He saw the father he used to fear. Then it was gone. I slumped back, let the pen drop from my hand. It rolled across the table and fell to the floor, staining the Persian rug with ink. "I can't. My hand hurts. Want to go to bed." The room gasped. Rachel looked ready to scream. She bent down, snatched up the pen, shoved it back in my hand. "Pick it up. You're not going to bed until you sign." She grabbed my wrist, physically forced my hand toward the paper. The notary stepped forward nervously. "Mrs. Carter, you can't do that. He has to sign willingly. If you force his hand, the document is void." "I don't care," Rachel shrieked, losing all composure. "He wants to sign. Look, he's nodding." She shook my shoulder violently. My head bobbled. "See, he's nodding. Notarize it." I let out a low moan of distress.
"This is elder abuse," someone muttered from the back. Marcus turned on the crowd, face red. It's not abuse. He's confused. We're trying to help him. He turned back to me desperately. Dad, please, for me, for your son, just sign the paper. I looked at him, looked at the paper, and then I did something they didn't expect. I smiled. Not a senile smile, a cold, hard smile. I leaned forward, bringing my lips close to the microphone. The room went deathly silent. They expected babbling, pleading for cake. Instead, I spoke 2 words, clear, precise. Not yet. I dropped the mic. It hit the table with a deafening thud. The room erupted in whispers. Marcus looked like he'd been shot. Rachel looked ready to strangle me in front of everyone. I sat back, closing my eyes, feigning exhaustion. But inside, I was counting down. The trap was set. They'd forced me, threatened me, humiliated me, all on camera, in front of witnesses and a notary. Now I just needed the payoff, and it was walking through the front door right now. The room went so quiet you could hear a pin drop. I looked down at the Mont Blanc pen in my hand, black resin with gold trim, a symbol of the luxury Marcus craved. He was staring at me, eyes wide with panic, waiting for me to finish what I'd started. I tightened my grip on that pen. My hands were strong again, 40 years of torquing engine bolts. With a sharp, sudden movement, I snapped the pen in half. The crack echoed like a gunshot. Ink exploded over my fingers, black and permanent. Marcus jumped back. Rachel gasped. I didn't look at the mess. I stood up. Without using armrests, without a cane, I stood straight, my spine uncurling from the hunch I'd forced on it for days. I looked at my son, and for the first time in a week, the fog was gone from my eyes, replaced by cold, hard clarity that made him step back. "I'm old, Marcus," I said, and my voice wasn't tremulous. It was deep, steady, projected from the chest. "I'm old, but I'm not stupid, and I'm certainly not deaf." The color drained from his face like blood evaporating. "You wanted a show," I said, looking around at the stunned guests. "You invited half of Seattle to watch you take everything from your father. Well, let's give them a show they'll actually remember." I pulled out the small remote I'd synced to the sound system earlier, pressed play. The speakers crackled to life at maximum volume, but it wasn't my voice that came out. It was Rachel's. "It's disgusting. The whole house smells of him. Bengay and old skin. I have to burn candles just from keeping from gagging." The recording echoed off the high ceilings. Socialites covered their mouths. Rachel stood frozen, clutching her pearls. I skipped to the next track. "I can't host the gala with a zombie shuffling around. As long as they change his diaper and feed him pudding, he'll be fine. I just need him out of my house." The crowd began murmuring. The notary started packing his bag, hands shaking. But I wasn't done. I looked at Marcus, and now for the main event. I pressed the button again. Marcus's voice clear as a bell. "The VIN numbers on those Range Rovers are flagged. I don't care how you wash them. Run them through the Shell Company in Montana. I have a buyer paying cash, under the table, no tax." The silence shattered. The Wells Fargo banker dropped his glass. It exploded on the floor. Everyone was staring at Marcus. "That's a lie!" Marcus screamed. "It's deepfake, AI. He's manipulating audio. Can't you see he's crazy?" I looked toward the double doors. Abernathy was standing there, and he wasn't alone. Sheriff Miller, a man whose patrol cars I'd fixed since the 90s, and 2 deputies. The sheriff walked into the room. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. He walked straight to Marcus. "Marcus Carter," the sheriff said grimly, "you have the right to silence." Marcus looked at me, eyes pleading. "Dad, stop this! Tell them! We're family!" "Family?" I repeated,
the word tasting bitter. You lost that right when you forged a restraining order against your brother, when you planned to throw me in a facility to rot. I stepped closer as police cuffed his hands behind his back. The click of handcuffs was the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. But I wasn't done, son, I said softly, so only he could hear. I have one more gift, your birthday present. I turned to the crowd, to Emma's camera still streaming to 50,000 people. The lease on the land this showroom sits on, the 5 acres of prime commercial real estate that my son's entire business depends on. I pulled the original contract from my inside pocket. It was a 10-year lease. It expired last night at midnight. Clause 4B, no automatic renewal. Preston let limp in the officer's grip. I didn't renew it, I continued. And since you were so eager to sell my land, I saved you the trouble. I sold it myself this morning. I held up the bill of sale. I sold the entire 5-acre parcel to Amazon Logistics for $4.2 million. The wire transfer hit my account an hour ago. They're turning this location into a distribution hub. I looked Marcus dead in the eye. They take possession in 48 hours. The demolition crew arrives tomorrow morning at 8 sharp. You have 24 hours to move 50 luxury cars off my property. Marcus slumped completely. His knees gave out. And Marcus, I added, delivering the final blow. If there's a single car left when the bulldozers arrive, I gave them permission to flatten it.
Rachel screamed, a primal sound of total loss. She lunged at me, fingernails like claws. "You ruined us, you evil old man!" A deputy stepped in front of her, grabbing her arm. "Mrs. Carter, you're coming too. We have recordings of you conspiring to commit elder abuse and fraud." As they dragged them out, the party dissolved into chaos. Guests fled, trying to distance themselves from the scandal. I stood in the center of the wreckage, suit stained with ink, heart pounding. I looked at Emma, still filming but not smiling anymore. Comments flying by too fast to read, but I saw the emojis. Fire, skulls, applause. The internet had turned on them. "Stop filming," I said gently. She lowered the phone, terrified. "Grandpa, I didn't know." "You knew," I said quietly. "You just didn't care." I turned and walked toward Abernathy. The old lawyer was smiling, a rare, genuine smile. "We did it, William." "We did the easy part," I replied. "Now comes the hard part." I looked out at the driveway. Rain had stopped, sun breaking through clouds. I had $4 million in the bank, my dignity back. But my work wasn't finished. I had a son to find and tools to buy back. "Let's go, Abernathy. Drive me to the shop. We have a mechanic to save." The police lights flashing in the driveway were the only real decoration left. I watched from the porch as they guided Marcus into the squad car. He looked small, stripped of arrogance. He tried to catch my eye one last time, maybe to beg, maybe to scream. I looked away. A father never stops loving his child, but sometimes love means letting them face consequences. Rachel sat on the fountain steps weeping, not quiet, dignified crying, the wailing of a woman who realized the ATM was permanently unplugged. A deputy explained the house was a crime scene, subject to immediate bank seizure. She looked up at me, mascara running in black rivers. "Where am I supposed to go?" I remembered the night she told me a limp would teach me responsibility. "You'll manage," I said softly, echoing Emma's words to me. "There's a shelter downtown. They serve soup at 6. I stood and walked away. I'd done what I needed here. The house was empty. The empire of lies had fallen. I signaled to Abernathy waiting by my F-150. The truck was parked on the street because Rachel had forbidden it in the driveway. It looked beautiful in the sunset, battered and honest. "You okay, William?" Abernathy asked, handing me the keys. "Better than okay. I'm free." I climbed into the driver's seat.
engine roared to life with a familiar rumble, the sound of loyalty. I drove away from the mansion, leaving police lights in my rearview mirror. I didn't feel triumph. I felt relief. The cancer was cut out. Now it was time to heal. I drove straight to the industrial district, gritty neighborhood of warehouses and chain-link fences, the kind of place Marcus would never set foot. I pulled up to the small garage where Daniel rented a single bay. The sign was faded and peeling. I walked inside. Daniel was there, working under the hood of a beat-up sedan by the light of a single hanging bulb. He looked exhausted, using a cheap, rusty wrench that looked like it came from a dollar store. "Daniel," I called out. He jumped, banging his head on the hood. When he saw me, his face crumpled with worry. "Pops, what are you doing here? The restraining order. Marcus said if he sees you—" "There is no restraining order, son. There never was. It was a lie, just like everything else." Daniel looked confused. "The police came," I said, "but not for you, for Marcus." I told him everything. The recordings, the sale of the land, the look on Rachel's face when it all came crashing down. Daniel listened, mouth hanging open. He leaned against the workbench, stunned. "So it's over?" he whispered. "It's over. They can never hurt us again." I reached into my pocket, pulled out a set of keys, shiny and new, attached to a heavy brass tag. "I took a walk to Pioneer Square this afternoon, met with a realtor." Daniel stared at the keys. "What are these?" "I sold the land for $4.2 million, Daniel. Put $3 million in a trust for medical care and charity. Took the rest and bought something." I grabbed his hand and pressed the keys into his palm. "There's a building on 4th Avenue. Used to be a luxury auto body shop. 4 bays, hydraulic lifts, heated office, paint booth, fully stocked." Daniel stared at the keys. "4th Avenue, Pops. That's prime real estate. That place is huge." "It's yours. The deed's in your name. Carter and Son Auto Repair. Or just Son Auto Repair. Name it whatever you want." Daniel looked at me, tears welling up. "Pops, I can't take this. It's too much. I sold my tools because I wanted to—" I stopped him, hands on his shoulders. He was taller than me now, broad and strong, built of iron and heart. "I sold your tools," I said, voice thick with emotion. "You sold the only thing that mattered to save an old man's leg. So I'm giving you the ocean."
He broke, pulled me into a hug that lifted me off the ground. He smelled of oil and sweat and honest work, the best smell in the world. I held him tight, feeling sobs shake his chest. "Thank you, Pops," he choked out. "Don't thank me. You saved me first. You reminded me that blood doesn't make family. Loyalty makes family. Love makes family." We stood there in that dimly lit garage. Outside, the world was messy. There would be trials, lawyers, noise. But in here, everything was fixed. The machine was running smooth. I pulled back and looked at him. "Come on, let's go see your new shop. I think I saw a Snap-on truck nearby. We have shopping to do." Daniel laughed, a genuine, bright sound, chasing away shadows. As we walked to my truck, I looked up at the night sky, stars shining clear above city lights. I was 78, bad leg, broken family, long road ahead. But climbing into the passenger seat, watching my son start the engine, I knew one thing. I was the richest man in Seattle. This is William Carter signing off. Thank you for listening to my story. Tell me in the comments, and if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. This journey taught me that DNA is biology, but loyalty is choice. I spent years thinking I owed Marcus everything because he was my blood, only to realize that while he felt entitled to my fortune, Daniel, the son with nothing, was the only one who valued my existence. Never let fear of being alone keep you where you're disrespected.
True wealth isn't the assets you protect. It's the people who protect you when you're vulnerable. Always choose the family that chooses you. If Daniel's sacrifice touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth today. Until next time, stay strong.